Hi, Michael. Hi, Linda.
Becky. Whoop. Hi, Becky.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, okay, I'll be right back.
Did I say something?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Melissa.
How is everyone?
Good. How good. I think I've had enough skiing now. I can, the snow
good.
can melt.
I'm sure you've done enough for both of us.
I think so. I'm proud of it. I brought my husband for his second shot today, so I'm not sure how he's doing in the other room.
I know several people that have gone through both, and some have fared pretty well, and others have had a little bit of immune response. So,
We'll see.
yeah.
I'm glad it's done.
Huh?
I'm glad it's done. I'll never get a shot. They don't exist. They don't exist.
I won't, my age group will hit like July or something like that.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Of 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you doing?
We do have Rita here too. You have a quorum.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Rita.
She was muted.
Yep. You can unmute yourself, Rita, if you'd like.
How are you doing today, Rita?
Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah, I had an appointment today that got canceled last night.
For shot?
Oh no.
My first shot. Yeah. Then I tried to get another one. It's hopeless.
It is. I think I was in the waiting room and it was, I think, 71,000 minutes I had to wait.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that?
Thursday you can try again for the the big sites.
Yeah, that made me a little nuts last week, but
Yeah.
it'll happen. I figured,
I know.
when 50,000 people don't need to have it done now, they're done.
Right.
So the line is getting shorter. I tried to be Alan's caregiver, but they wouldn't accept caregivers of PBS. But I'm sorry, that is so frustrating. So
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
I had a bad day.
Well, we'll cheer you up here.
Oh, good.
Probably not.
And I see Evan Turner and Donna are both
Hello?
here.
Yes, I see them too.
Melissa, I'm going to make you the co-host.
Okay. Let me just double check. I'm only got one computer today, so
It's a great computer, though. It works.
yes, it's
Does it all, right?
it's not using 4 different things to do one. So we're good.
But if we need, yeah, hopefully Evan. Hi, Evan.
Hello.
Hello.
If we need to put anything on a up on a whiteboard, do you have anything to put up on a whiteboard today?
I've got a PowerPoint I was going to screen share with everyone.
Okay.
And then if required, we can move around the town on some other maps that I can bring up in a web browser.
Beautiful.
Good.
That'll be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, shall we call the select board to order?
You're in order.
Okay. All right. And I know that the planning board has this meeting posted as well. Do you guys have a quorum? Would
Yeah.
you like to call yourselves to order or no? What would you like to do?
Deacon, you're muted.
You're muted, Deacon.
There's Deacon. He's looking for the unmute. There we go.
Deacon, hang on. Let me see if I can unmute you. I don't have that capability.
Deacon, lower left, unmute.
I can't find
There
Deacon.
There he
you
goes.
are.
Okay,
You did it. Great.
I wasn't sure of the correct protocol. I mean, we were here. I posted the meeting in the event that we had a quorum. I wasn't sure what we were supposed to do, if I'm supposed to initiate a planning board meeting at this point or not.
Yeah, you should call us to order so we can talk.
And
Okay.
Donna's here if you want her opinion.
Donna, do you have an opinion on whether or not it was a meeting between the select board and the Evan and AMP about the AMP thing? Do you think the planning board should be called to order if they have a quorum and want to?
Yes.
Okay, I'll call the planning board to order.
All right, thank you. All right, so the select board usually does open public comment, so let's do a couple minutes of that. Does anyone, please raise your hand in the screen so I can see you if you have a comment. Michael, I see you. Does anybody else have one? I have 2 pages here. Hold on one second. Does anybody else have a comment they'd like to share? Okay. All right, Michael first, and then Phoebe. Is that what that says on your screen? Okay,
Why don't you unmute?
Ashley.
go ahead.
Ashley, it's Ashley.
Ashley, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I have a comment and a question. And I would say it's coming as a member of the planning board, but it's not on the agenda, so I'm doing it as a comment. So tomorrow's meeting is about the solar bylaws when you guys are meeting.
Mhm.
And my comment is that the original meeting for tonight, which was scheduled last week, the planning board was not giving a heads up about that. Tomorrow's meeting, which is
Oh, yes, you
specifically
were.
we did not get ahead of time. Eventually we did, but we didn't get notice. And then we got no notice about the select board meeting tomorrow, specifically about solar bylaws, which we wrote and we're intimately involved with. And I find both those things really troubling. And I guess my question is, how are the succession of planning board related items getting onto the select board agenda? Is the select board asking for them, or is the town administrator who builds the agenda putting them on?
Mhm.
So I'd like to know a specific answer to that question. And I do want to raise my concerns that the select board is addressing solar and planning board related things without communicating in advance to the planning board, which is intimately related. So can someone answer a question about how they're getting on the agenda?
Not during public comment.
Why not?
We normally just take comments during public comment. I'm
Which
not
would
saying
mean,
your question won't get answered, but
Becky, we don't always do that. We have conversations during open comment too. It's only if you don't want to answer the question that you would revert to that.
So, Michael, the one thing that's on there is, it's the emphasis.
Donna had a comment to make, Melissa.
Okay, go ahead. Becky, did you say, I missed what you just said.
Oh, Donna raised her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Donna, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even though it's public comment, I think this is a very important issue for tonight. So with the chair's permission, I'd like to address this whole issue.
Okay, you can address it,
Um,
Donna.
I think it's important for boards to understand that boards have multiple duties and issues in front of the town are relevant to multiple boards. In particular, the issues around development, and in this particular issue, solar development, is not just the bailiwick of the planning board. The planning board is the special permitting authority. That's their totally at their discretion, and they will proceed accordingly and are certainly more than versed in how to do that. That said, given DOER's new mandates and new regs, and given other issues around solar development, and even past solar development, there are large issues for the assessors, for the select board, and for other boards to play in this development. All towns have select boards, administrators that are tasked with finding development, finding a tax base. That said, they have every right to be involved in those kind of processes around attracting development, talking to developers, and making determinations of whether they believe that the development would be good for the community. It doesn't mean that they in any way take this planning board's power to permit a development away from the planning board. But the idea that the planning board has exclusive jurisdiction over development when there's pilots, when there's MOUs, when there's all kinds of other agreements that will be entered into by the town rather than the planning board, which the planning board has no jurisdiction over. It's just, those can be done concurrently, and there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't be done concurrently. So I think it's really important for the planning board and the board of selectmen to understand that they have different functions in this development, and that each board can move forward as they choose in reviewing this development concept, looking at it, and hopefully discussing with each other where they're going with it, what their concerns are, what their issues are, what they're trying to accomplish, so that there's an open dialogue here. But none of this is exclusive jurisdiction. So I don't think anybody should look at it like that or feel that they are doing a job that nobody else has a hand in one way or another.
Right. So Donna, you just responded to my point, which was that there was no open communication and there was no coordination. So when I was on the select board, my experience was if we had questions arising, which was in the bailiwick of another committee, we would schedule a conversation and we would invite the other committee to come and talk to us. What's happened this last week and tomorrow is that third parties were invited to a meeting by the select board, and the planning board was not invited for an open conversation either before or during. And that's the issue. There is no coordination, and it's front-loading discussions to the exclusion of a body. And that's an issue.
Well, I don't know that you can say it's exclusion of a body. These are open meetings, and you can,
Well,
of course, attend.
One makes a call.
So
and
I don't
says-
think it's exclusion per se, Michael. But I get where you're coming from. But I think that the point was not in any way to exclude the planning board. I think the point was for the select board to figure out exactly what their ducks were and how to get them in a row around issues that are not planning board issues relative to solar development. In particular, the MOU on the solar manager. You know, if the town's going to enter into an MOU on a solar manager, which is part of this whole piece, that's a very separate and distinct issue from anything going on with the planning board. Not that the planning board shouldn't know about it, but it's a very separate and distinct issue that the planning board, you know, I'm sure would want to comment on, but doesn't really have any particular, you know, say in.
Well, I guess I think it's bigger issues. You know, I requested that you be part of this meeting because those are things that the planning board and the select board want to be talking about together. So we don't, you know, compromise a process that hasn't even begun yet. So we can talk about the substance of it because that's the topic of the meeting, but I mostly wanted to point out the fact that the planning board does have an interest in this and we should be coordinating as town committees. And the last 2 weeks have not demonstrated that. I asked Deacon to post this meeting. Okay, so it wasn't like there was a select board led effort to engage other committees, which is what happened when I was on the select board and I think prior.
Michael, I would point out that Becky did invite me and other planning board members to come.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Prior to anything that you did, Michael, I worked with the chair of the planning board. I was not working with you. And for some reason, you're distressed about that. In
It's
communicating
not an
with
ego thing.
Deacons, you know, follows up with his board. I'm not responsible to communicate to your whole board. I was in touch with the planning board. The first time I talked with Deacon, we just started talking about whether it should be posted for the planning board or not prior to seeing any of your emails.
Okay.
And I communicated to him right away when we changed the date. So if you have an issue, you need to discuss it with your chair.
I'm done.
Thank you, Ashley.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize because I'm a layperson. So the whole processes here that are going on, I may not get it all right. And I also apologize because I'm really busy, so I would have prepared more for this, but I understand, Becky, you said it's not a time for questions, but I'm wondering as a layperson if you can answer, is there going to be a vote tonight by the planning board on a public-private partnership with AMP Energy?
AMP, the public-private relationship would not ever be signed by the planning board.
Okay,
It is not an agreement with the planning board. It's an agreement with the select board and a town meeting vote.
okay. So the select board, is there going to be an agreement made tonight or not an agreement made tonight? Is that up for discussion?
We won't know until towards the end of the meeting, I guess, if we, you know.
The three of us have never really, we have not discussed this in the public meeting.
Okay,
to this
Or
point,
amongst ourselves.
or amongst ourselves, or in my
It's
own
their
head.
territory and they have lots of questions.
Yes.
okay. So, okay, I understand. So I'm happy to just sort of watch, but as I've been doing, but I would like to make a couple of comments. As far as I know, there's no active permit applications in front of the planning board at this point,
Mhm.
correct? For any of the solar developments, the potential solar developments? Okay. Okay, thanks. So I'm wondering the timeline for that. And as far as making any sort of partnership with developers, I want to say this, it's hard for me to express my opinion. I'm not anti-development. I think that our town has created some good zoning bylaws related to solar development, and I would like to see them honored. So my question for the developers is, do they intend to honor our bylaws as they're written, or are they going to be asking for special exemptions to the stipulations we've put out in our bylaws? And if so, why? I'm curious why they would want to go against what the town has already voted on, or not go against, but try and go in addition to. And to the select board, I want to say, without any active permits already out there, I, as a town person, would appreciate it if you didn't go into any sort of formal agreement with the developer until the process that the town has set up has a chance to go through. So allow the planning board to review these applications and, you know, tweak the plans as they are coming before them. Allow the historical commission to do its thing, and then agree to go into some sort of partnership. I'm not sure why the partnership needs to happen right now. I think I have an idea, but I'm a layperson. I don't really know, but I just feel like our town gave a pretty resounding mandate to the select board when we passed our bylaws in June of 2020, you know, by nearly unanimous vote. And I'd like to see the select board honor those bylaws, at least as we go through the process. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I'd like to see the townspeople be able to have their voice heard in this process. And that's all. I'm going to sit through and see if there's another opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to hear the developers say what they have to say. And I appreciate the planning board's work. Thank you for working for our town. That's all.
Does anybody else have a Marina?
I was wondering if we could see the members of the select board raise their hands so that those of us who haven't been at this meeting before understand who's here.
Why don't we, each of us, put on our title what board we're on if we're representing.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
And also the whoever's here representing AMP also.
I don't know how to change my name yet.
That's okay. I can do it for you, Evan.
Thank you.
What would you like it to say?
I mean, you just put a little dash with, you know, representing AMP
Okay.
would be an easy handle.
Evan, who are the other two parties with AMP?
So I think some other folks here from AMP, Michael Larkin is with AMP. Chris McDermott is with AMP. Camille Littlefield is with AMP. And I think that's all the AMP folks on the call. I guess Tom Reedy here with us serving as counsel for a number of parties, but also AMP.
Do you get all that, Melissa?
I'm just looking for the names because they're not all in a row. So hold on one second.
And also the planning board members.
I can work on planning board.
Okay.
Deacon has his.
Okay. Is there anyone else we're missing from AMP by chance? Did I catch everybody? I'm happy to.
I believe so. At least I don't see anyone here I recognize from AMP, so that's probably it.
All right. Here, I'll shorten my name because it doesn't quite fit on the screen. So I'll just do a shortened version. Okay. That's a great, we should probably do that more often, April. That's a great idea.
I
think that's a great idea.
It's too bad Zoom doesn't let us sit together.
Well, or let you pin people in order either, you know?
Right. Right.
Okay. All right. So, oh, I'm not even on tonight's schedule now. I've moved it. Let's go to, Becky, is there any 10-minute updates we need to do, or can we go right into working with Evan and AMP?
I think we can move right in.
Okay. All right. So, Evan, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll go from there. April and Rita, is there anything you want them to start with first, or just head into what he had prepared and we'll go from there with questions and such?
I would like him to start with what he has prepared.
Okay. Rita, is that fine with you?
Just from the beginning. I think
Okay.
there are people here who don't have a whole lot of background.
Okay, go ahead, Evan.
Thank you, ladies. So my name is Evan Turner. I represent AMP Energy, who is has a lease option for property with WD Coles for 5 prospective sites around Shutesbury, mostly on the west and southwest parts of town. We will cover the specific sites in a moment. I work with AMP as a developer, taking solar projects exclusively from a raw piece of land into a functional operating built solar array. We started up several years ago looking at some land in Shutesbury owned by WD Coles, and it has matured over the last 2 years to where we are today, spanning, I think all of 2 cycles of rule changes at the state level, which will be a big topic of our discussions tonight. So I'm going to drop into a screen share here. And if everyone will tell me when you've got this up. Oh, could someone enable my screen sharing, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Evan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
One second.
All right. Perfect. All right. So screen 2. Excellent. And could I confirm someone is recording the meeting? Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
Yes, we are recording.
Fantastic. So I have a PowerPoint here that'll walk through the high points. Of course, I can go into excruciating detail as required, but I think this is going to take about 15 minutes or so to run through. So we're going to talk about today, going to introduce the team and the projects, talk about kind of what we're looking at in good and bad situations, direct and indirect benefits you see there on page 9, and then cover, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, there's a lot of intersection of your zoning and your bylaws and different paths we think this development can take, and a lot of things to inform the solar industry ecosystem in the bylaw territory in Massachusetts that I think there's a better way to do this than necessarily the way it's always been done. On the call today, we've got Mr. Chris McDermott, who is a specialist with AMP, covering all sorts of policy and development issues. We've also got Mr. Mike Larkin and Miss Camille Littlefield, who are on the development team with me, and Mr. Tom Reedy serving as the counsel before, also for WD Coles, but in this case also represents us as the developer. And I do believe there are some WD Coles representatives in the audience as well. So for the last 2 years, well, let me step back. For the last 2 years, I'm working on this development, wetlands, Concom work, working with the utility. And I do recall you guys had a summary page on your website for the last month or so. Pretty accurate, all things considered, translating from my monologues to some notes. The one big note I'd like to say in there that was a little bit incorrect at this point is that we don't have some big interconnection deadline coming up in the next month or 3. That is the better part of a year away. So that's the only obvious error in that document that I do want to make sure if people have read, they know is a little bit off target. So what we're looking at are 5 potential sites that are challenging to develop in light of the current bylaw, and that there appears to be now a better way to do solar in a municipal partnership model that was released in the changes to the solar program at the state level, those changes taking place in April of last year. And then, sort of getting the fallout and the growth from that, we realized there was a really good opportunity to do this more cooperatively. And the short version of that is that if we work with the host town to own or operate the arrays in those towns, we get effectively an HOV lane for the solar development at the state level. So that involves the states or the town more or less standing up a renewables manager position to service a local operations contract. As we'll cover a bit later, operations are more physical maintenance and some electrical maintenance, all of which we would support the town with on very thoroughly and pay for. And when we work with a town like that in the solar program, we get HOV lane treatment, which is just more predictable, more certain. And we're certainly looking for a process that is less fraught with potential problematic paths and development, lowers the chances of getting into painful litigation, and overall can make a more cooperative design process. That's the goal, is we do it better in cooperation with towns, should they be willing. Of course, it's all about what you choose to do. There's obviously no mechanism, or we will use one where people can be made to do. So we think this is all just pursuing upside in a better process. So this is slide I expect to send to Becky and the select board after this meeting so that you can post it on a website and people can catch up later. So here's our, please make sure you've got the most relevant information disclaimer page. So AMP, aside from me, I am a very local developer. AMP is a global owner, operator, and developer of renewable assets at many scales and at many different countries, with a big focus in North America because they are originally Canadian and still Canadian. They didn't change, but they've done stuff all over the globe, from Japan to India to plenty of work in Canada. And they've gotten real invested and interested in this Northeast Massachusetts market. And they've been my partner with development work for the better part of 3+ years now. So I do and focus on a lot of local work. They provide me the resources of a big company who will own and operate this stuff and can make very serious commitments. And that helps not us having to flip projects, which is a challenging part of the solar industry. And I would say one of the worst parts of the development part is that, one developer develops something, you flip it to another owner, they might flip it again later. And it's just a real frustrating point where a lot of promises get lost if they weren't written down. And even some of the ones that get written down don't do so well. So I liked, when I was looking for a partner with my development work, like Shutesbury, to find someone on the other end of the spectrum from just the on-the-ground initial development work that would be the owner-operator long-term. AMP is looking to own and operate these things for 35+ years. So it is definitely a multi-generational commitment to a community. We work together. They're going to be the ones inheriting any of the problems. So we work very hard to avoid making problems whereas another flipping developer may be not so concerned about a truly sustainable, responsible setup. So the 5 projects were frozen to work with Shutesbury. And this has a lot of work inside the public entity and the SMART program. Hopefully that brings us to a point where we can mature the MOU we sent to the select board last month, which was sort of a food for thought, starting point. And then we'll talk about what we see as creating an operations contract that is serviced by a renewable manager that is probably in some capacity an employee of the town of Shutesbury. As long as we satisfy the DOER, which just has a say in the structure, we have plenty of flexibility. So there are 5 proposed solar locations, again, on the west and southwest part of town, more or less originating from the substation in the very west portion of town. And I will start northeast to southwest, furthest away, pretty much to closest. The first array is on Montague Road for the access. Can everyone see my mouse, by the way? Can someone give me thumbs up?
Yeah.
I see some thumbs up. I see some head shakes. So off Montague Road, this is a large property, 200 some acres, I believe. And in the north portion, we will be looking to do an array around Carver Road, which is often used for skiing and snowmobiling, I believe at the discretion of the landowner. That is one of the larger sites. We have a second, much smaller site on the corner of Leverett and Montague, on the southeast corner of the, I think, Paul C. Jones working forest, which is shown in green here. The more recent Walter Coles Jones, I believe I've got that right, working forest is in orange. That was recently put into working forestry by W.D. Coles, is in orange. And that hosts our third array in the middle, just south of the existing array, in the middle of a giant tract of land. I believe that is typically known as the Wheelock parcel. Mm-hmm. Our fourth array is northwest of the substation, behind the substation in the inside of 400 and some acres. It is a medium-sized array. And then our fifth proposed item is in the south part of the property, almost into Amherst, and it is on some W.D. Coles land that is surrounded by the Amherst water supply land, as well as the APR farm on Poverty Mountain there to the west, and abuts a number of acres owned by W.D. Coles in Pelham. It is more or less the northern piece of a much larger tract of land that just happens to stick into Shutesbury. And there is a sixth project we've discontinued on Baker Street. Did not just fit the profile, a lot more wetlands than we thought we would have, which of course makes a smaller project and harder to work. And also we get, with taking Baker Street out, we get this one nice corridor down Montague, down Leverett, down Pratt Corner for the interconnection work around town. So it kind of just makes one long trunk of projects, and this guy is 2.5 miles out of the way or more. So it was a good one to swap out for the Pratt South site here on the north side of their Hearthstone piece. Rough sizes. What we're aiming at here, this is no shading the color here. This is a very large proposal as a group of projects. Solar in Massachusetts, it's only generally getting larger in some ways. Big projects are getting bigger, and at the same time, small projects are getting smaller. So there's a little bit of bifurcation in the sizes. These projects are old enough to grandfather into previous rules under the SMART program. So some of the current rules, if you're digging in those regs, are not applicable. That is a very complex regulatory document. Happy to walk through it with some folks if they want to see how this all structures in that program. But the short version is we're looking for 3 large arrays, which could be bigger than this, but not by a ton, and 2 medium-size arrays, adding up to 45 megawatts, which to my knowledge is the largest portfolio that would be in Massachusetts presently in one go. Possible but aggressive sizing above 50. Those are numbers that we can't say we absolutely will hit, but generally speaking on the same acreage, because the project acreage won't change, more megawatts means more clean energy, means more revenue, means stronger economics that we build in over time. For the avoidance of doubt or confusion, the connection size is in AC electricity. That is fixed at 20, unless the utility tells us they need to make it smaller, which is probably unlikely at this point. So we overbuild in the field to some amount, typically right now 2 to 1 or a little bigger over our connection size here. 3 big, 2 medium. We see these having, some pretty exciting benefits, the economic side as well as the environmental and, economy side. So roughly proposing a 10,000 per megawatt year pilot, operations contract fee of 55, comes out to 15,500. What we see is, improved revenue for Shutesbury that does not come with specific expensive obligations. And we look at 9,000 a year as what we would pay you guys to do the operations work itself. That is very comparable to our private market operation services that, I know those folks are doing very well. They're making money. They're a private business on. So I think Shutesbury can probably make a good amount of this value back as well. So what that comes down to is that we look at nearly $500,000 a year in a pilot. We look at nearly $250,000 a year in operations value. And then, some portion of this operations contract expense, I do expect you guys could make some return on because I see if, you're talking to a couple people and a bunch of equipment, we do believe that $400,000 a year is a very healthy budget for that work. On the environment side, thanks to the Walter Coles Jones Working Forest, and I do hope I get that right every time, that we've effectively got 10 parts forest, 1 part solar. That is an exceptionally excellent conservation ratio and well exceeding of, I think it very much meets and overwhelms the spirit of the bylaw. Of course, they're not all on the exact same parcel. So there is some work there to be done to make sure every project would be appropriately covered. A very common question for the carbon math. The arrays are farly carbon CO2 superior than the trees, although that's not to say that trees do not have other excellent ecological features. But I will also say so do pollinator meadows because I'd like the bees to live as long as I do. To give you some perspective on size, 600,000 or 60,000 megawatt hours a year, which is kind of like 5,000 houses worth of power every year. And we think we were going to upgrade Shutesbury substation. We might even replace it as part of getting this off the ground. So a nice little pictogram of this, at 45 megawatts, we were proposing about $700,000 a year in, unobligated value to Shutesbury. And that comes down with another $400,000 a year on the operations contract expenses. That largely represents the cost to do the actual work, just like we would pay any other private company. And as you'll see, it's mostly physical work at the sites. You guys would have the local operations, the digital operations playing in electricity markets, etc. Those are all typically done by other subcontractors. AMP does a lot of this work themselves, as an example, and that is not something we expect you guys to be doing. It's not something any generic array owner would do. You would always sub that out to a specialist to make sure you get the right value for your facility. So here's a little background on the contract, on the information. In April, they changed the regs to encourage public work. The regs just did not compete on public versus private work. And you have seen over several years in the development ecosystem, a huge amount of private solar come through, and very often in not a very graceful manner, situation to situation, which is why we're here, trying to be more graceful. So their preference with this operated by work is that it happens by the local municipality and direct employees to the greatest extent. So we would be looking to either train up some of your employees, or more likely you guys may be looking to bring on a role of a renewables manager that we could either help you guys source the people of, we could help train the right person. It's whatever works with Shutesbury. You're a partner in this structure. So we'd be here to support you in that role. And I also have to say it would be very nice as an owner operator to know that the local town is the one taking care of your array, because we don't have to bid this operations work out every 2 years. So it's kind of nice that your hometown crowd could also be the one taking care of things. There's a certain value to that stability. And then, the 9,000 a megawatt, like I said, is largely going to the cost of the actual operations contract, employees, their pensions, etc., if that's required, third-party contractors, equipment you may need for this work, etc. Again, we went largely based off the cost we have in the private market. We're not looking for Shutesbury to ever take a risk on the value of that contract, and we're not looking to magically undercut what we pay in the private market either. So here we are. Oh, mouse scroll, there we go. So the property work, operations, snow removal, vegetation, pollinator meadows are going to be a new big thing that we think a lot of towns would like to see done as well as possible, because this really fits. Along the solar work, you're talking about panel swap outs, preventative maintenance on the equipment and the fans, reporting some things to the DOER. They have to make sure the arrays operate as planned. And then there's third-party coordination. Most of the equipment on this site is all under warranty and under original manufacturer servicing. We're not having anyone out there going to tinker with the circuit boards on an inverter. That is definitely the work of the owner manufacturer when those things are under warranty for 20 plus years. Indirect environmental benefits. This is more for the take home for the folks, but it is overwhelmingly valuable to have, from the CO2 perspective, to have solar arrays. But I don't think we need to spend too much time on this with me monologuing now. And as Michael mentioned earlier in the meeting, a lot of this discussion, I think, may circle around the bylaws. The short version is your bylaws have a number of features that are very challenging to permit through, that are de facto prohibition. And we don't want to find ourselves, if we can avoid it, in a case where we'll have to submit an application, we just get turned down because they're de facto not possible to work at all. And then we end up in a litigious route that I don't really think benefits anyone in that circumstance, especially in light of the state rulings and the Dover Amendment on what is permissible, what is not. I will tell you personally, I think there are a number of things in your bylaw that would not stand up during an appeal process, but I don't want to go crack the bylaw just to do it. I want to find a way that makes this work much better with Shutesbury and meets the spirit and intent of your bylaw. But it may not meet it in the exact form and function you envisioned. One of these challenges, by example, and I don't think this is intentional, but you get into the weeds of it and it happens, large scale arrays are not allowed in the yellow. It is a zoning quirk / case in Massachusetts from case law that access is the use. So in this case, not allowing the yellow to serve as access road for a solar array means I couldn't permit an access road anywhere on one of these major streets to any of the arrays. That's a pretty frustrating situation to be in. That is quasi de facto prohibition. So there are some things like that I think your bylaw could do honestly better with the full light of, knowing not supposed to prohibit it, but reasonably regulate it. This is more of a quirk, but it does, sort of highlight a big issue that if I'm going into a development cycle this year with 5 projects, I don't want something like this hanging out there that is a pretty painful, appeal or process down the line. So other items that we'd love to discuss, the access road limitations that Mr. Jeff Lacey brought up in our previous planning board icebreaker meeting, would another easy thing we think we could handle. But then there are some things that are really challenging. The mitigation for carbon sequestration, we obviously want to do it. We are very well versed in the carbon math. And I think, the spirit of the Walter C. Jones Working Forest is, very much meets that and does above and beyond. There are some habitat impacts that I think we are undervaluing a little bit, the value of the pollinators, as well as the fact that it's just private property, which it is difficult to say what the owner should do through a zoning bylaw, so far as what they're obligated to do with trees or not trees, a use, no use, a different use. And then the solar map is not terribly challenging, but it may be a little weird for that 3rd array south of the original array. But that's otherwise, I don't want to run into a conflict there. That one might be reasonable to work with. But some other items, for instance, like your layers of the biomap, critical natural landscape and/or forest core, and the DEP layer on it's kind of important wildlife habitat. None of those terribly intended to be regulatory documents, but all of them de facto prohibiting solar over 95+% of town, and certainly entire parcels. That is going to be if that isn't somehow addressed, you will end up in an appeal situation one way or another, and I don't think that's very productive. So we looked at some of these options that if we're working with the town, that we'd like to look at something like, and this is just starting a discussion. So for you folks, I guess, listening at home, we're not proposing anyone vote on this tonight. We're just opening the conversation to say, here's where we kind of think we could do this together. So I'm thinking we're going to need, if you do this operations contract, somewhere down the line is a town meeting vote to, I expect, to authorize it. I don't have a crazy great idea of what your select board is baseline authorized to do, but it looks to me very similar to a pilot, which typically calls for a town meeting vote to approve it and/or for the Board of Selectmen to negotiate it and execute it. So the operations contract we see in a very similar way. And in that case, the town has to vote as a town. And if that were to work, we would kind of like to see, I would love to sidestep having to challenge a lot of your bylaw in the case of making a municipally partnered project allowable with a site plan review by the planning board in the tradition, of course, of separation of powers and thorough review. We think that is a little more graceful than trying to bang our heads against the bylaw. And it, of course, if I'm the town, I like my scary bylaw that's tough to meet because it keeps junior varsity development from showing up very easily. But in the case that we're working, sort of a tripartite agreement here with Coles making a large, huge is a better term, conservation recently, and us looking to work with Shutesbury and AMP, Coles, Shutesbury, AMP, in a bit of a tripartite structure, we'd like to think that is a good way to go for municipal partnered projects. And of course, in this case, it gives the town an enormous amount of power that far surpasses the actual zoning bylaws, because of course the town, through a non-binding MOU, has complete discretion of whether or not it wants to work with you on any given project or any given facet of a project. X design, Y design, located here, that layer, this layer, up to the town on what it wants to work with you on. So I have to have the faith here, and I think we do, because we'll build the trust, that the town would not exercise de facto veto power with a too heavy of a hand over things we propose to design in cooperation with them. So on the side note there, the Conservation Commission works exactly as the Conservation Commission always does. This has no change in their jurisdiction or process. Their regs are ironclad through the Mass DEP and the state level regs. So the idea is we do a partnership on the design. That means I can bring you guys into the design process without it being sort of, a little bit, head to head in some of these permit meetings. We all sit around the table, we all contribute, we figure out what fits best. If there are things you guys want in the design process that your bylaws don't cover, we just work through it, because I absolutely want to earn the right to work with Shutesbury cooperatively, because we get in that HOV lane. Don't want to end up down a horribly litigious path. We think that, allowing municipal projects by, just allowed with a site plan review still gives the planning board a lot of all the same jurisdiction for the projects itself, but gives us a little smoother path to not wondering if we're going to get, turned down and then we end up in court, and that's a horrible thing. And we absolutely, I'm trying so hard not to go down that route. Don't even want to get close to it. And then let's see, just working through my notes here. We can get to 50. I guess the way I'm happy here, it's a lot more work. I think the solar program has made a way with this public partnership model, municipal partnership, whatever you want to call it, that we finally have a way to, provide the towns a better economic return for the solar projects, because it is a, there's a reason you get the reputation as an industry, although certainly not, I think, as individual companies, that solar shows up and we don't quite provide as much value as the paying we cause. And, there are all sorts of tax regs that I would, hand off to Kevin for, to lead a discussion on how Shutesbury would, should treat that. But I finally found a way with this new public partnership model to improve the value you give towns and give them a better say in the process that isn't just private party on private land doing private work, and you get what you get. I'd like to think these things are a long-term part of the community, and that you have community input that is not contentious, terminal, but constructive and makes the better project, even if it's not as big, even if it's not as valuable for the developer, the right fit and the project that gets done that's respectful is better than the one that might get done, but you spend a year and a half butting heads over. And the last part is, I think this contract, might go longer than 20 years. We certainly think the arrays do, but 20 years represents the solar program's fixed price period, which gives us all certainty. So I'd like to think this is an opportunity for Shutesbury as well to build in some generational revenue and a tax base, that doesn't require a fundamental change to a town, doesn't require industrial parks and that sort of thing, but does obviously reinforce and provide a new foundation that keeps you guys, away from the 25 limit and the Proposition 2.5 structure, which for a lot of rural towns that I work in, is a looming threat over time as economics get a little hollower. And of course, you don't want to completely change the nature of your town. I love the idea of Shutesbury being a forest town where, your 2% people stuff, roads, houses, etc., 95% plus forest, and 2 to 3% at most solar. By way of example, the 190 acres that we're proposing to work on, all private land, all working forest presently, is about 1% of Shutesbury. So for 1% of the town, I think this is an excellent use of land. Certainly needs to be governed well, but I think we can find a more graceful way through the next year and a half of permits than potentially going down a litigious, unfortunate path. And with that, I'm gonna hand the floor over to Mr. Tom Reedy to cover anything that I may have missed. I'm gonna stop sharing here, and then I'd like to hand the floor over to my folks at AMP for the same thing. And then I'd like to hand the floor back over to the select board I guess to start the discussion, questions, etc.
Great. Thanks, Evan. So hi, everybody. For the record, Tom Reedy. I'm an attorney with Bacon Wilson down in Amherst, Peter McConnell's office, if you remember Peter. I represent both Coles and AMP, and I don't have much to add. I think Evan's presentation and summary were very comprehensive. I think we're excited for this opportunity and for the discussion, hopefully to begin, especially with the memorandum of understanding, if it's something, and like Evan said, we don't need a vote tonight, but if it's something that the town looks to pursue. So, with that, I'm happy to answer any technical questions, but I'll turn it over to the AMP folks to fill in any gaps that we've missed.
Hi, I'm Chris McDermott. I'm with AMP. I manage our policy and our strategy. And just to add on to Evan's presentation, the genesis of this public entity idea is really quite recent. It was when the new regulations for the SMART program were announced in April of 2020. And in terms of what that's supposed to look like, there was no guidance. There was just something in the regulation that talked about it being something could be a public solar project if it was operated by the town in which the solar array was located. But there was no additional guidance. And so this gets to a question that was raised earlier as to why we need an MOU. And we need an MOU so we can go back to the DOER and say, hey, this is our idea. This is how we are interpreting your regulation. Here's our proposal. What do you think? And so that's really why we need the MOU. And there's a two-stage process in the approvals with the DOER. There's an initial stage prior to any construction, and then there's a final stage. And the DOER guidelines, what they have given us as guidance is to say they want to see an MOU at that initial stage, and then they want to see the contract at the final stage post-construction. So even though we don't know exactly what the DOER is thinking, we know that we need to give them an MOU early on just to ask for their blessing if we're on the right track.
And I think, and I'll hand this right over after, they're giving us the opportunity to set a standard. Yeah, they more or less said, interesting idea, show us. So we think there's a better way to build a more cooperative model here. And that's working with you guys where we jointly provide an MOU to the DOER and we say, this is what we have in mind. Does it fit what you're looking for? And they'll probably come back and have a little bit of input, but then we're trailblazing a new, better way to do this. That is obviously, I think, superior because it gives the towns more input. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Town isn't mandated to partner with anybody, but it gives us another opportunity, I think, for the towns to have more input and consideration if you want a better type of solar project with the state programs. So we're excited to explore that and see what you guys would need. And I think with that, thank you for your time and your consideration. I think we've got a lot of questions and even more people, everyone joining on the meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Starting with the select board, do we have any questions that we'd like to ask Evan or Chris? Go ahead, Rita.
I guess I first have a question for Donna about the bylaw, the solar bylaw that was passed. So the solar bylaw was passed and then approved by the Attorney General.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And there was some notations in that, or some qualifications in that approval, just saying these are things you might want to pay attention to, but it did not disapprove of our bylaw.
Right.
So I guess, Evan, when you talk about litigating the bylaw, I'm just really curious if this is something that has, why do you think you'll be able to litigate if in fact the bylaw has been approved by the AG's office and was approved by town meeting?
Mm-hmm. So I'll go with Tom Reedy after I answer this. If Tom, you want to load up some thoughts. The AG approving a bylaw is not the same thing as saying the bylaw is in concurrence with the Dover Amendment at the state level. My understanding is their approvals are largely limited to blatantly incorrect illegal structures that would be like basically discrimination. We shall not permanent array to someone over the age of 73. Some obvious category that's wrong. It is not interpreting what reasonable regulation would be in Chapter 40, Section 3A. So there are some cases where that has gone to court. And I think the guidance you would get from the AG is be very careful that you don't implement a bylaw as to be de facto prohibition, because that would be a very challenging place for you to be.
Yeah, and maybe just to follow up on that, as Attorney McNichol can probably tell you, the letters that you get from the Attorney General's office when they're approving solar bylaws come with, I'll call a big asterisk saying, superficially okay, but watch how it's actually conditioned or enforced, because that's where you can run into the problems, as Evan mentioned, with 40A Section 3, the so-called Dover Amendment. You know, and I think one of the best examples that Evan had mentioned was when you look for strict application of your zoning bylaw and the fact that, as he mentioned, access is use, and that you can't actually access any of the backland without going through a prohibited zone. So effectively, you can't reach that zone. If the Attorney General's office had all of those details, they probably would have called that out, but they just don't look that far. They look, as Evan mentioned, superficially to say there's nothing on the surface or on the face of it discriminatory, and it doesn't offend 48 Section 3 or other state law. And so it's when it's applied that there could be issues.
So I guess my follow-up question is back to you, Donna. Do you, you reviewed this, worked with the planning board on the bylaw. What's your take on how strong it is, or do you anticipate?
I don't think it's quite as black and white as Mr. Turner or Attorney Reedy are saying. They're absolutely correct. The Attorney General looks at the bylaw to make sure that it isn't obviously illegal. They do consider the Dover Amendment because it's a very important part of Massachusetts state law. The Dover Amendment is essentially the amendment that says you can't unreasonably regulate education, farmland, et cetera, et cetera. And you're all familiar with it, even though you may not be familiar with it being called the Dover Amendment. And certainly the Dover Amendment is applicable to unreasonable regulation of solar. But there's case law that's very clear that some pretty strict solar bylaws have been held to be constitutional, and even though they were challenged by solar companies, the court said sorry. For instance, the example that you can't get through the 500 feet of rural residential to the backland. Well, we know that you may not be able to through rural residential, but you can through the TC district. And there's a footnote right in the zoning bylaw that says that if you're going through the TC district, the use, even if the use is prohibited in the TC, if it's allowed in the FC, you can get through. The other thing is you could always put a subdivision road in. You could put a very simple subdivision road through the RR and get to the backland. And subdivision roads are not considered a use in the same way that Mr. Turner explained a driveway to a solar facility would be. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, our bylaw is very strict. And everybody knows that. But to categorize it as something that would be struck down in court, you'd still have to apply for the permits, you'd still have to be turned down, then you'd have to appeal it. It's just not that black and white. That doesn't mean that the town doesn't want to work with AMP. It doesn't mean any of those things. But I think that we don't have to be as concerned about the bylaw or the challenges. What I would like to really have Mr. Turner, Attorney Reedy, answer is, how do you get to site plan review rather than the special permit, seen as our bylaw calls for a special permit? What's the proposal there from AMP?
This would be, I guess, food for thought. It's, I mean, close to a proposal, but just more of an idea to discuss, that you would create a municipal partnered array category in your bylaws that would simply be allowed in the districts with a site plan review. Would, I think, be a graceful way to do that, because I agree it's going to be a gray territory if we apply and would get turned down on 5 sites if there's something fundamental across the board, and then we appeal. We don't want to go down that route. I don't want to have to find out how many ways you can slice and dice X reg against the Dover Amendment. That's just a mess. So I would say allow the municipal partner projects with a site plan review, because the town has the 1000% jurisdiction on whether it wants, or discretion, whether it wants to do it at any given time.
So, but I would just like to be clear in your presentation, part of that municipal public-private partnership would be a change in the zoning bylaw for the specific solar arrays that are a municipal or public-private partnership to have a different zoning treatment than other solar arrays?
I think that makes sense because the
No, I
town can
just
set whatever
wanted-
standard. Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted it clear, that's all.
Yeah, I don't think
Thank
that
you.
is any way of getting out of control because it requires a town meeting vote to get there. So I think it's even more strict to get yourself in that position. We thought that was an easy way because I don't want to lessen your bylaws. I don't want to, they're tough and that's fine. But I also don't want to put us in a position where we're butting heads against it. So that seemed
But the
like a
other
good
thing
way.
that other thing I would just put out to the select board, so then the planning board can speak even better on this than I can. But I think the other thing you need to remember is that there is a huge waiver provision in our solar bylaw. Our solar the very first provision almost in the solar bylaw basically gives the planning board, as long as the concepts within the solar bylaw are met, the ability to waive almost every provision that Mr. Turner raised in his email to you. And so I'm just trying to sort of get the whole picture out here so that as we're discussing them, everybody sort of understands. One would be going back to town meeting for a change to the solar bylaw, and there's no guarantee of that, and we all know it. The other is to apply for the permits and apply for the waivers. And you know, because I think our planning board has been pretty good about solar development. The Wheelock project went through and there was a lot of give and take, a lot of back and forth, a lot of issues raised, but I think it turned out to be a very good project directed by the planning board. So I sort of want all that out here so that I think that we're all working towards a common goal. Shutesbury wants more tax revenue. Shutesbury wants to preserve their forest. Shutesbury doesn't want to necessarily change, but we would love more money. Yeah. So no doubt about it. So I don't think that the goal is different for anybody here at this meeting. I think the question is, how do we get there so that the citizens of Shutesbury feel that we're meeting the needs of the taxpayers to reduce taxes or at least get more income, and at the same time keeping true to what Shutesbury wants to be like, caring about the environment, caring about alternative energy and all of those things. So I think that's, you know, a common goal for everybody here.
And I would like to kind of dovetail on Donna, what you're speaking about. You know, I have more of a Gestalt view on this because I've been in this town for 35 years and change sucks. It's terrifying. One of these proposed sites is literally in my backyard, land that I've walked on for 35 years. And I'm entirely intrigued by the idea that we could significantly reduce the tax rate in this town so that we're not parsing out, you know, we'll say 10,000 here, 10,000 there, and little things, that we really could have some money to, you know, for education, for whatever we want as a community, but also to be able to do that within the context of being a very large provider of green energy. You know, and the state, the good state of Massachusetts is, I think, total of 70% forested. And so, you know, there's not a lot of alternative energy sources. And, you know, we could have wind energy, maybe some hydro, but solar is probably, you know, when you've got a lot of space that you can actually build on. And that, but in Massachusetts, cutting forests for solar is not unreasonable. And I also just wanted, you know, the Coles family business, I think they have been really good stewards of their land. And they are perhaps the largest landowner in the state. I'm not sure, but they own a lot of property. And I see this as a creative way to partner with our community, provide green energy, help the Coles, you know, business survive. And, you know, with the tract of land that was recently done in Shutesbury and the previous one in Leverett and Shutesbury, there's like nearly 5,000 acres of preserved woodland. So, it's always like the energy, the solar, the nuclear plant is down there for those people. This is an opportunity for us, I guess, and it's not a nuclear plant. This really is green energy, and I think that it's a very big opportunity for this community.
I would second that, April. I think that, Coles has been a good neighbor. They need to diversify their lumber with something else, or otherwise it's clear cutting more forest for other reasons. So, I agree with you, April, and Rita too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the truth is, this is land that I love and walked on, the Carver Road, and, it's really, so I think sometimes you have to think about the greater good. It's not my land.
Right. Rita?
So I had just a question for you, Evan, at the very beginning of the PowerPoint presentation. You said that there was a correction to the summary, I believe, that was posted on the town website. Is that correct? And
Yes,
I just made a note to myself that you said there's no interconnection deadline. Is that?
There is always a eventual deadline.
Okay.
But there was a note in there that said there was a payment due in March or February or something that was, transitionary big, if it isn't met. It's just not the case. I think there are a ton of incremental payments when you study 20 megawatts of solar and then have to get them designed into the community. But there's nothing, that's like some big giant bill showing up in the immediate future. I see that, I saw that on some of the public boards, talking about the projects, but that was the only thing that was like, oh, that's a little off base on that one, that I think we got lost in translation.
But I believe that was stated by,
that may be
that there was
me
12, that
saying
there
it,
was
but I'm not sure if I got across, like, if it's an incremental payment or a long payment. Grid, by example, continues to push back the date at which they'll be done with the design. So it's also quite possible some of those dates have moved. During conversations, they're like, oh, we got to do some more studying. What was May now became October. That happens.
It was March. It was $12 million by the end of March.
Oh yeah, that's not
what you stated.
That might be me misspeaking. Because that's not the case. I'm guessing that payment happens in 2022 right now.
Okay,
and that's a big update from the grid we got last week. So it might have been that was an original timeline, and I probably just got a little wrapped up in that date, but it is no longer applicable.
So
just one note, if I could, to bounce off of Donna there. We're trying to, as a developer and the special permit waiver versus another route, it is always just a little concerning that when I go to a board, any two members could just say, no, we don't want it ever. And then I'm forced into an appeal. So that's always my concern. There's one part of your bylaw with the 1,000-foot access or driveway that Mr. Lacey brought up that I don't think the planning board can waive. That's a smaller thing. But I would love to rely on those waivers. It is just a little more mentally challenging to see that needing 5, 6, 7 waivers and thinking it might also perfectly line up. So
no, and Evan, that's perfectly legitimate as a developer. Of course, you would much have a site plan review, which you can't turn down as long as you meet all the criteria. So the town totally loses its discretion there, although it does have some say in the design. And with a special permit, the planning board has discretion. There's no doubt about that. That's a political question for the town. That's not my issue. I'm, council. So
yes,
that's up for them to decide. I just want to make sure they understand the distinction of what you're proposing. Then it's up for the town to work on where they want to go with it.
yes, ma'am. And my thought is, the town has such a unilateral right to decide what it wants to work with you on, that it's just it's a different situation. But it's food for thought. It's not a mandate or a requirement it's just, we thought about it. Oh, that might work. Let's have a discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I also thought when it's just first looking at the operations management stuff, having to do that, initially it seemed like a huge task until I stepped back and remembered we're running our own broadband company in this town. We built it. We have the capacity to run things in this town. So it's an intriguing kind of partnership. It's like having the day-to-day work and a part of that operations locally, that we would be doing that. And I think we're the type of community that could rise to the occasion to pick up that kind of work. We've got our own Shutesbury net.
Mhm.
Could come up with another name.
Michael.
You're muted.
Michael?
So I have a couple of things. The first thing, just April, we subcontract with Crocker for the technical services operations. We don't do it for explicitly that reason. We don't
But
have.
we could
We don't.
subcontract,
But we
we could do that with another, anyway.
We could sub. So I guess I have a couple of thoughts. For me, it comes back to why are we having this meeting now? And I guess I would congratulate Evan on a strategy of building momentum and putting things out there. My big takeaway, if it breaks down, is we want to give the town money. And as you said multiple times, we can litigate and that'll cost town money. So that's sort of the equation that's getting put out there. I have a hard time with that. So that's just, and the MOU is about money. I have two questions. One is for Donna, which is looking at the MOU. My big concern is going forward, if the town signs an MOU, what implicit commitment is it? If you look at the language, item 2, project background, it says AMP is developing. There's not even a proposal submitted. So if we're signing an MOU that's saying AMP is developing, what does that mean? And then the intentionality behind signing something. So I'm concerned about that, but don't answer yet. And then the question I have for Evan is twofold. A few times you mentioned the HOV lane. And so I know there's financial benefit to becoming a public entity under SMART, but in terms of the application, I looked through it and nothing jumped out at me in terms of approval process at the state level. And there's no motivation for us. It's for AMP to have a smoother ride if there is an HOV lane. Or are you implying the HOV lane means that you're not litigating and therefore we're not having a bumpy process? And then my final thought, which Evan, you can answer, is I actually don't see this as a public-private partnership at all. I see this as a contractor where, yes, the town would be an operator because you're paying us a contract. But from what I can see from SMART, there's an adder of 0.02 for kilowatt hour if you're working with a public entity. So if you really want to be innovative and you really want to help the town, I would say jettison the operator, and of the 0.02, give the town 0.01. So we actually have ownership in this because you're getting extra money by saying that you're a public entity. So split the difference and then we would actually get some real money out of it and we wouldn't have to be responsible for operating. So Donna, if you can answer my question about commitment, and Evan, you can answer about what you mean by HOV lane, that would be helpful.
Sure. Michael, the MOU is proposed. Obviously, I would want some significant changes in it, that would make it much clearer that it's a non-binding MOU, that it's a concept, that if we go forward, permitting the project, going through all the processes and everything else, that this is what this is the contract we would work on. And it's nothing more than that we would commit to working on seeing if we could come to agreement on a contract. So I don't believe that the changes I would like to see to the MOU are such that it would make it very clear it's not binding. And it's just basically saying, we agree to talk to you.
Okay, I can go with that. Thank you. And Evan, HOV lane?
Yes, sir. So some of your understanding or presentation of the mechanics of the SMART program are a little bit off, and a lot of it is just crazy detailed nuance that is so
Okay.
fun to parse through.
So Evan, I'm
So-
pretty good at reading policy, so
Mhm. So
I
let me-
might read it wrong, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. So when I mean HOV lane, you get, as a public entity project, you get some exemptions from certain regs.
Which
But
one?
an important item is that you do not have to wait for your interconnection, by example, to get into your SMART program qualification. So they'll give you an early reservation into the club. Normally you have to wait for all of your interconnection, you have to wait for all of your permits, and then you can get your allocation. With a public partnership project, they let towns go to the front of the line. If you're planning on doing it, you get your reservation.
Can I just
Fantastic.
correct you? The front of the line would be the private developer who is paying a contract for a town gets to go to the front of the line.
Yeah, I mean, there's no,
The
Shutesbury
town's still
doesn't
part of-
own the application.
But get the language correct. Give us the dignity of sort of using it right. It's not our project. You're contracting with us.
Sure.
So-
I think you're parsing the words there. I like, fine. It's contracting with Shutesbury, partnering with Shutesbury, take your word, your pick. And yeah, it's the adder system, the value structure there, while we can offer the pilots why we're offering a management fee, etc., represents splitting adder value, more or less. We're certainty for value. It is not functional to insert a non-taxable entity into the solar array ownership and retain the federal investment tax credit. It doesn't work. It might work in the future if they change it with the new legislation proposed this year, but currently it has no ability to mix, which is why they say own or operate in that public entity category. So we ask the question, what does operate mean? I think we could locally partner with the town to do the operations and create a nicer path that gets everyone a bit more, because more certainty for us. We lock in, our SMART allocation now, which is an important thing to have to finance things. Everyone's happier when you have more certainty earlier. And that means we can offer a stronger proposal to the town than we could under a community solar concept, which is otherwise perfectly workable. Or which we could offer if, we look to get another town. There are other ways through the public entity structure that involve buying the land. It's a whole different thing. But effectively, through the public entity process or community solar, the program wants you to find someone to benefit. In the case of community solar, it's other customers. Someone across the state gets 10% off their power bill. I'd rather have that kind of money stay in Shutesbury where the projects are. And that's effectively what the public adder lets us do. One of the changes they made was effectively to make the public adder have any fiscal competition with the community solar adder in SMART, to make them on a level playing field, more or less, because they found no one did public partnerships because it takes things like this. And I mean the word, public contractorships, whatever the term you want to use there. But it's, otherwise our options here are to go through with a community solar array, which is fine. But I found, this is a better way to do it that leaves more of the money in the town.
Okay, well, just a follow-up thing, since you think about this all the time. If the ownership for a non-tax paying entity doesn't work, I would put out that our broadband is through municipal lighting, which was a construct that had to be explored. There's probably entities that are taxable that could be created that have some representation. So, so there's imaginative ways to allow for partial ownership and direct benefit of splitting the adder.
We looked at the partial ownership model. DWR shot it down in a hurry. They didn't want to see some 5 or 10% ownership share being given away and that qualify. That was our first thought. But they weren't happy with that. They want to see more investment by everyone to make that, a very much a engaged process. So operations work for us. It's more complex, but I think as solar becomes more prevalent over the years, and it will, as a power source and an installation around the rural parts of the state, it wouldn't be a horrible thing to have a renewables manager on your staff, that also takes care of the arrays in town. Who better to have keeping an eye on the projects. That also, I imagine that to be in some cases like a building or electrical inspector, you maybe they work for a couple towns, maybe it's, part of your DPW, like it's however you guys want to structure the operations. We're not concerned except to support you. But we tried ownership. We'd love to make it work, but presently there's no way to make it work between the financing side and the DOER side. But that would be, if it works, we'd talk about it.
Okay, not to monopolize, just a last request. If you can send an email to the planning board in the Shutesbury with the other exemptions for this, so-called HOV lane besides the getting to the front of the line, it would be helpful to understand what the benefits to the project are for AMP by having it be a public entity involved.
I can look at that, sir. I will say I'm a little bit gun shy because the last time we explained some of the stuff and it became social knowledge, the planning board changed their bylaws in a hurry. So I will say I got a little bit of shyness there. But broadly speaking, it exempts things, and the projects are grandfathered into older regs. So that colors it. But generally speaking, you get exemption from some of the land use layers like the biomap stuff they talk about. And you get a little bit, well, that's the main thing. In this case, it's the main thing. The biomap that covers 95% of Shutesbury. So there are other ways to work in those areas, but the public entity is the cleanest. It's the preferred or the favored nation status of the category 1 of the 3 types of projects. So it gets up there with agriculture and building mounted and stuff like that. But I'll send you guys a write-up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Don, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just think it's a really blunt question. And does the HOU lane let you bypass the Shutesbury zoning bylaw?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. It just lets us get more certainty with the SMART program and probably get our allocation to that program sooner rather than later. But it in no way changes local zoning. It just assumes the town, it assumes you're going to be able to get there if the town is willing and able to work with you.
Thank you.
If it isn't, you don't have anything. Your allocation dies on the vine.
Are there any other questions? Rita, go ahead.
So I have a question just around the sequencing here and the timing of signing an MOU. I think Chris, maybe McDermott, you were speaking to this. So I think on the schedule, it talked about taking the MOU, assigned MOU to DOER sometime around April, and that there's a 2-stage approval process. That there's an initial, what DOR does an initial approval prior to construction, and then a final agreement on the contract, that they look at the final contract. So I assume it's an MOU, then there's a final contract. Can you clarify what that is? And then also, I guess, with that, why the MOU now before any filings to the planning?
The MOU would be part of the filing. So as Evan said, with respect to the HOV lane, there's normally a number of prerequisites that you need to have before you can file. Interconnection, for instance, is a very large part of that. And we don't have yet a signed interconnection agreement from the utility. And so what this allows us to do is apply to the program without that interconnection agreement. So that's why there's kind of 2 reasons why we'd like to have this MOU. One, so we can see if the DOER likes the idea, likes our arrangement, because as I explained, they have no guidance. So we need to ask them if this is within the framework of what they were thinking about. That's reason number 1 for the MOU. Reason number 2 for the MOU is because of the existence of the MOU and the fact that this under the MOU could be considered a public project, we can apply to the program generally to get what's called our SMART reservation. So when you get a SMART reservation, you aren't only reserving the public adder, which is related to the public entity aspect of the project, you're reserving the entire tariff. And so that's what it's kind of a two-pronged process with the MOU. The fact that it's public allows us to get the blessing of the DOER. The fact that it's public allows us to reserve the entire tariff sooner than we would have been able to do otherwise.
Can I interject, Rita? Were you asking about why the MOU before they file proposals for special permits, not to the state? Because I think.
Yeah,
yeah,
because,
it was-
Okay.
and I think what I was just hearing is that the MOU is going to be part of your application to the planning board too? Is that
I think
correct?
we're turning those two around.
No.
Okay.
The MOU we're starting now because it will take a lot of time, right? We'd like to know going into this if we're doing a traditional community solar. If you guys just said thanks but no thanks,
Okay.
we'd go back the traditional community solar route. It has some design implications, although not a ton.
Okay.
It's similarly, solar on the ground is solar on the ground, but it does make for smaller projects and some other discussions along the pilot territory that are different. But part of it is just we want to see if there's legs here. That's going to take time to do it well. I'm sure Donna and Tom Reedy and Chris and myself would have a lot of work to do getting an MOU in the place where we're all happy with it. And we want the time to take months to do it. So in the meantime, we still have a lot of application materials and plans to build with every one of these sites. But the submissions to the planning board will take a lot of time as well. And they can run kind of in parallel. You get the HOV lane treatment of public projects. It just gives towns better treatment. That treatment gives us better certainty across this whole process. Because we know we've got we get a price for our power. We get some dates that we can work around, and we think it improves the likelihood of the projects overall just succeeding and being more valuable to everybody.
So can I?
So
Melissa,
one
can I jump
second, I see Stephen's hand. up
Okay.
front there. Hold on, Michael.
Yeah.
Muted, sir.
Thank you, Evan. You're muted, Stephen.
Let me try this again.
Okay.
Evan, maybe you can explain what makes this a public-private partnership simply hiring the town of Shutesbury to maintain the solar installations?
That's about it. That's what the regs say, operated locally by the municipality. So we're finding out exactly how deep that goes.
Okay, to my way of thinking, that's a thin public-private partnership. As you said before, you would pay the town of Shutesbury a comparable compensation, the same that you would pay a private company to maintain it.
Mhm.
So we are the hired help.
To an extent, that is the operations contract, but I think it ultimately comes with a lot more intimacy in the development side because you guys are signing up to take care of it for us locally. So yeah, it's a contractor relationship, but given the nature of how we also mix in permitting, I think it opens up some other avenues to just work together voluntarily. Because if there's something you guys just want different, I think that's part of the consideration of doing an operations contract. You not strong-armed into it, you get to choose to do it.
And how is that different than conditions we might put on a special permit?
So you will be limited by the bylaw, by example, on setbacks or screening, however the bylaw is written. But maybe there's a spot where you're like, you know what, we'd love more here. Bylaw doesn't says we has this setback and that screening. But if you say, Evan, we would like you to push back just because we think this, you need to here to do it best. We'll just work with you on it. It's just a more cooperative mindset where we're getting better treatment for one another, I think. And if we're in that territory, I'm not going to feel like in the permitting process, I've got to hold this like iron line to get at, because I feel like giving ground, just like you guys do, giving ground is painful. But I want to do the right project that fits. And if Shutesbury has other thoughts above and beyond the bylaw, well, then we can just talk about it because I want to earn your cooperation.
I just add, it's also more financially accretive to Shutesbury than if we just hired you as a contractor. Because that, when we go back to that slide that had the various cash flows, there was the contracting fee, which is essentially just a flow through to the municipal employees and subcontractors, et cetera. But there was also the management fee. And that would be additional to what would exist in a private relationship. I mean, in essence, this is taking some of the subsidy that we're getting from the DOER and giving it back to the town through that operations management fee. It's conceptually similar to community solar, where we get a tariff for community solar, and then we in turn sell electricity to residents at a discounted rate. It's kind of the way the DOER runs the program. They give the money to us, and then we redistribute it.
I'm curious, are there any programs already existing? Or do you have this arrangement with any other up and running solar facility?
No,
This is new.
it's brand
Brand
new. And to my knowledge, there's no precedent. And I think what's interesting about the Shutesbury precedent is because there's so many arrays tied to this. I mean, it's really quite an interesting pilot, if you will, because, you know, this is a case where there's enough work where you could actually hire technical staff or train existing staff. But as we've thought about it, there are some licenses that are required. So it's more likely you may hire people with these licenses. And I think it's really interesting in that respect, because there is enough work to support full-time employees on this. Whereas if it was just a one-off array, it would be difficult to support an employee full-time.
We saw it as, I work in all the rural towns, and I want a reason like to work with you more than it just being a private partner, private property, private business, talk about a pilot, eventually bang your way through, your solar bylaws in any given town. I'd like to think they've built a way that's more cooperative. If you're willing to work together, you can get better value for everybody. Isn't that nice? But it means you can step aside from just bylaws and talk about what fits.
Michael, and then Marina, and then Kevin.
I got one observation, then a question for Donna. I can be corrected later, but my impression from when I went to the SMART presentation last year at UMass was that there's more interest than there are slots in SMART. So my sense is that the advantage of getting in front of the line, and as Chris had talked about, getting your SMART reservation in place, means that the project will get a spot, whereas not everyone who's interested will get a spot. But don't answer, because I have a question for Donna. So Donna, looking at the pilot, which was the other thing that was originally going to be discussed, when Wheelock pilot was discussed and I was on the select board, somewhere well into, definitely after the hearings were in occurrence, maybe at the conclusion of the hearings, when we actually knew the magnitude and the design was agreed upon of the project, is when the select board then started conversations and negotiations about the pilot. So my question in terms of timing is, why would be getting spreadsheets with particular sizes of projects where nothing's been submitted for a proposal yet, and there's no final design finalized, except for the fact that we're then going to be all talking about how much money we would get or not get. But there's no urgency, as far as I can tell from precedent with Wheelock, to even talk about pilots before a proposal is even submitted to the planning board.
I don't know that we are talking about pilots at this stage of the game. My
Well,
understanding is we're talking about an MOU, which is essentially an understanding that we would work together for this whole private-public partnership, which would include Shutesbury and or employees of Shutesbury with maybe third-party contractors, basically running the solar.
Well, there was a pilot.
Now, let me finish, Michael. Let me finish, please. There are figures with proposed, or at least samples of figures within the MOU. And I noticed that in the slides, it said the MOU might even solidify figures for the operation management contract. The truth of the matter is, I don't think we're anywhere near figures for the operation management contract because the town's going to have to really look at that. They were talking about 2 full-time employees. You have to look at benefits. You have to look at retirement. You have to look at the retirement a lot longer than 20 years. So there's a lot of financial spreadsheets that need to be done. I believe the financial spreadsheets that Evan's put before us are basically a starting point to say, we think you could at least get this much. And that's all it is at this stage of the game. But you're absolutely right. We are not entering into a pilot until we know the size of the projects and everything else. But an MOU to agree to consider a contract for a public-private partnership is something that could be done early, as long as we're not being pinned down to accepting figures that we haven't been able to determine the accuracy of yet.
Okay, well, there was in an email from Evan to Becky 2 weeks ago, a spreadsheet, which I can share if we want, which had details. And so.
I
and it
know,
was-
but they're proposals, Michael.
But
They're
why-
nothing for nothing yet.
Right, but I guess my
They're not
question is,
anything yet.
but why would the town, this is my question for you, why would the town and the select board in particular want to be looking at figures for projects when there's no proposed projects?
Because there's an estimate of the size of the projects. And the reason the town is looking at this in large part is the financial benefit to the town. So if we start to take these as a starting point for what the benefit would be to the town, then we can begin discussing it. It's not premature, Michael. It's premature to agree to those figures. It's not premature to be thinking about them.
Okay.
Marina. Oh, are you there?
I'm hearing about the benefit to the town of having more income. And one of the things April mentioned is that taxes could be dramatically lowered. And maybe even other things could happen. So I'm just going in my mind, because I'm really trying to understand what people are weighing. And of course, that's one element. The other element is the information people have about the world. You know, different sets of information. So people are weighing money, and I'm extrapolating in my mind, what happens to this town if taxes aren't decreased? Well, presumably, given what's going on in our country, which is that the middle class is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, fewer people move to this town, and maybe even some of the residents move away because they can't afford to live here. And what that looks like is a town that stays forested with fewer humans in it. Now, if we go in the other direction, what happens is that the humans stay here. More humans would like to come then because the taxes are lowered and we have less forests. And so this is how, over time, because it's not like this happens once, this is how human beings deforest our planet. So I would like to suggest that maybe we expand the questions that we're asking, because this is a no-win situation. And I want to read something that I wrote and put on Nextdoor under a post that was then deleted mysteriously. Why are we discussing whether we should do so? Oh, before I read this, I just want to say that the other thing that's being thrown out there, besides money and trees, is, you know, basically race and class issues. You know, so why do we think that we're better and we shouldn't have solar arrays in our town when those people over there should? And I think that that's a very confused argument. You know, what about, why should I feel like I should get to stay living in Shutesbury if I can't afford it? If I can't afford it because I can't afford it because we chose not to have solar panel arrays because we're going to stand here and fight for the trees, then I'm going to go live with those other humans who don't get to live in forested areas. So I don't see this as, you know, a collective group of Shutesburyans sort of saying, oh, well, we shouldn't have to have solar arrays in our town and those people over there should. No, this is done on an individual basis where you say, I like living here. I don't want to have to go through the change of up and leaving. I want to be in the woods and I want to pay lower taxes so that I can stay here and afford to live here. And I don't have to live around those other people, if that is how you think, which is not how I think personally, but I do like living here, right? I do like nature. So just to kind of look at it from a different angle, why are we discussing whether we should, quote, do our part by chopping down trees when the top 1% controls and owns the lion's share of the economy and therefore is responsible for the lion's share of CO2 emissions? Our part is to keep our trees standing, insist on transparency in government, find ways of surviving without making money for big corporations, discover the most sustainable technologies, and demand these technologies be implemented in sustainable ways. If we treat each other with compassion, we will not succumb to fear. Then we can hold each other in our grief, challenge each other's ignorance, and refuse receipt of each other's anger. To be traumatized is to dissociate, Latin for separate. There are ways to cultivate compassion. Perception is state dependent.
Thank you, Marina. Kevin, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, Michael sort of led into what I was going to ask, which is Evan did put up a slide that talked about discussing pilot values in March and April of this year. And I agree with Michael that until you see what's approved in terms of size, scope, whether it's 1, whether it's 5, how big each is, you can study pilot all you want in March and April, but it doesn't make any sense till something's approved and you know where you're going. I mean, quite honestly, I like the fact they sent us numbers, Michael, because it gives something to react to. But quite honestly, upon receipt of them, I've been writing down a list of lots of questions for backup information to see how they got to those numbers and whether they're right or wrong for what's approved. So as far as I'm concerned, if this is a journey of 1,000 steps, we're in terms of a pilot, we're on step 1. We're not on step 999. So I hope that allays your concern. I mean, I looked at the numbers and I did a study of all 3 sets of numbers: the management fee, the pilot number, and the land valuation, because the land valuation underneath these arrays would change. And I came up with, a number of how it would affect the tax rate, but that's a stab in the dark at this point. That's just a wild guess that could change dramatically based on what is approved eventually. So I'm just, Michael, to your point, and to back up what Donna said, it's a nice starting point, but if I have a say in negotiating a pilot, I've got to know what's being built. That was my comment.
Becky.
No, I just wanted to put out there that on both sides, having a sense of what's happening. I know the contractors have to have some sense if the model they're proposing has any viability to build and even to propose. And for the town, we have a process for getting information out to the public that's going to take some doing. It's a complicated issue. And it's going to be a while before anybody knows what direction it's really going in. But, everybody needs to look at each other and put information out and try to sort this out to fully evaluate it.
Thank you, Becky. Does anyone have any other questions? Rita?
Yeah, I just have a question. I don't know, Evan, or if somebody else from the team wants to answer this. What happens if all 5 don't get approved? It sounds like everything's predicated on 5, and so you achieve these economies of scale by doing that many. But if just 2 of them got approved, then how does that impact the agreement, the SMART, your application for the SMART program?
It's a question that doesn't have a clear answer because what's become apparent in the state electrically is that you can go very small and try to get on existing power lines, or you can go very big and afford to upgrade a substation. And in between is a real tough target because you'll take up enough space on a power line with a project and stop before an upgrade, and then the next person is in line to pay for those upgrades. So the answer is I don't know. There is probably some threshold around one project that might fit on your substation, but it's not a new substation. It's a very old, small substation. What the most dangerous part is if 3 arrays were approved, then you still have to build a substation or rebuild the one that's there. And you have all the bills, but not all the scale. And that becomes a challenge because your bill is for 20. They're going to build you 20. And that's just part of the challenge of the development process. You got to give them a number. We had to give it to them. We had to give that to them 3 years ago to start that process of studying. So keep in mind why we're new here with you guys, and it's certainly the most probably important step. We are several years deep into working it on the other side, and that's just the risk in the part of the development that's challenging. So I'd say, if I knew I could get 18 out of the 20 megawatts of connection, I think that works. Volume does provide value to folks. I think it is unlikely but possible that the utility says, 17 megawatts connects really well, but 20 is really hard. It doesn't appear to be that circumstance, but I'm never going to guesstimate the utility that much. So it's possible it shrinks a little bit. But generally speaking, the projects will be about the same size because we'll spread the arrays out in the upland we have under contract there. So the answer is, 1 or 2, I would say more likely to mostly die. I think you need to get at least 4 out of 5. And it's, ideally you get 5 out of 5 because, we say that utility connection bill, I'm ballparking around 12 million when that bill comes due for the substation. It could easily be 15 to 20. They could tack on a whole bunch of other work. They could say it's going to take 4 years instead of 3. Then we have to just wait longer. None of this stuff moves that fast, by the way. We're not talking about anything that's turned on before 2023, I don't think. And so the answer is maybe, and I don't know. I'd like to not have to have that painful question really come up. So that's why we worked really hard to get the full 20 megawatts spread around. And we don't have to get all the megawatts DC out of it. They're not all created equal in value. But it is, I think, important to get at least above 40. But in that same area, I'd like to get to 50 because it improves all of the clean energy you make and the resulting revenue for everybody to do more solar in the same amount of footprint. So again, they're not all created equal, but I think I'd be scared to lose a lot of it.
Thanks.
Good point. Was there anyone else with any other questions? Go ahead, Stephen. Yeah.
Evan, can you help us understand where do you draw the line with your involvement as a developer in this process?
My line between who?
Between your involvement in the project. In other words, how long is your involvement in this project as we move forward go?
Oh, when do I fall off? Probably not any within years. I typically take a project from bare land and talking to a new landowner, like WD Coles in this case, several years ago, all the way through construction, but I don't do operations management. So that's why I like having AMP on board already, because they're the ones who you would be working with contractually. They're at my hip the entire time. So we build projects that we all know and understand, and we don't flip them later. Like I think Lodestar did to NextEra on the existing array.
Mhm. Thank you.
So my job is to midwife it into existence.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, Evan, got a question?
I think just a thought on the meeting of where we were hoping to move out of this. My hope was that, the select board would be in a spot where they thought they could, continue to work on the MOU, going forward. And that, AMP is certainly looking, if, to cover some of your legal fees on that. It's you guys just choosing to do more work. And that I think we would like to set up some processes for Mr. Reedy, myself, Chris, Donna, to keep working through what an MOU looks like. It would be my goal coming out of this meeting.
Rita and April, how do you feel about that?
I share that goal. I appreciate Donna having another look at it, because it seems like it needs another look. But that's, yes.
Yeah. We never expect first editions, numbers, or MOUs or whatever to be what you sign. It's the start of the discussion.
Right.
And you got to start somewhere, right? It's never, hopefully it doesn't. If I was so good to get it right the first time, man, that'd be amazing.
Rita, do you have any thoughts? Donna does have a comment.
I would just remind the select board that because this is negotiating strategy for a contract, because make no mistake about it, the MOU is a contract. You have the right to go into executive session to discuss and give your first thoughts on it. So I just want to remind you that that option's out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would reserve judgment.
Or maybe we should have an executive session
To talk it through.
to talk it through. It makes perfect sense.
I'm not prepared to do that tonight.
No, not tonight, not tonight.
We have
No.
to, I believe.
It
So.
has to be posted anyway.
We didn't post it or anything. Let's not go there.
Yeah, so Becky, you caught that, right? Executive session?
For
In the-
when?
For when? We didn't discuss when yet. Just,
I got the topic. I just don't know where to put it.
okay. I think I saw Penelope first, then Michael and Diane.
Just a quick question about the role of town meeting. When does the town meeting get to vote on a memorandum? Don't we take it to the town meeting? The MOU at what point?
Donna, could you answer that, please?
Yeah, the MOU, I don't believe would go to town meeting. It's not, the one that I envision, Penny, is not something that would be sufficiently binding or of a length of duration that it would go to town meeting. I think there are a lot of things that have been discussed tonight that would go to town meeting. There's certainly the pilot, even though that's not even out there yet. There's certainly the contract that the MOU would discuss. If that was ever realized, that would go to town meeting. There's also been some talk about zoning bylaws. Of course, that would go to town meeting. And then there's always the option of putting a referendum at town meeting, at an early town meeting, based on the whole concept around this project and how Shutesbury voters feel about it. So there's a lot of things that can go to town meeting, but I don't believe the MOU itself would.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, could we put this on our agenda for the 16th of March? We have a meeting tomorrow. We might have a week off of meetings. We might not.
You may not. I think the 16th works well. Rita, does that feel good to you? And Becky?
Yeah, 16th
Yeah.
is fine.
Yeah, there's no huge rush.
Okay. Michael?
Yet, just a question for Donna and a thought. I mean, as the select board develops the MOU, a couple of people have talked about transparency. I think it has a big impact on town, obviously. And if we're thinking about hiring a new staff person or something, that the select board prioritizes putting that on the website and making it available in its iterations so people have a sense of what steps we're going towards. You know, you have to have your process and all that. The other thing, I guess, question I have for Donna, the idea of a developer paying for the town's legal fees to talk about a contract with a developer, while maybe not a conflict of interest source, seems, it rings a little weird to me. So I guess I have a caution about that. You know, we're always talking about conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest. What's your take on an applicant paying for legal costs for us to negotiate with them on a contract with them?
That happens fairly frequently, Michael. It's not that much different from a consultant to the planning board or consulting fees. Obviously, if we were going to do that process and that was going to be part of any understanding, that money would go in escrow and they'd have no control over, you know, how much time I spent or any of those things regarding advising the town.
Okay, thank you.
Diane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, what happens with the project when the equipment has reached the end of its useful life?
Good question. Evan?
Yes, ma'am. So the useful life is probably, we envision 35 to 45 to 50 years in the future. So one of the things that would apply in any special permit that you'd never want to ever get rid of is you have a decommissioning bond or fund or something that sits with the town, doesn't sit with the array owner, to fund the decommissioning in the event that the array owner does not do it. So you effectively insure yourself against that possibility. We see that being a long way in the future. Probably at year 20, we'd probably reskin the entire array with new batteries, new panels, new electrical equipment, and it has a second life or a third life down the line. So the structure of that decommissioning agreement is one of the most important things in any permit, special permit, site plan review, take your pick. It's got to be in there. Our traditional way of doing that is that you set up one that every 5 years, a planning board can call for a new number and a new surety amount, so that every 5 years you can ratchet according to new costs. You get a different number for panel recycling or steel salvage value. And the planning board can just reset the number that's required to be in a bond or in a surety fund or something. So we put money aside or we insure heavily against that, and the town can call on that insurance. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yeah, thank you.
Diane, if I could add to that, in the current rental lease that Coles has with, I guess it's now Florida Power and Light, who owns NextEra, formerly Lodestar. In that rental clause, Coles also put in some wording about decommissioning that I'm sure Mr. Reedy could explain, but I know that they have language and fees in there to also protect the property owner. And since this is also Cole's land, I would expect them to do the same in the future.
All right, any other questions? Shall we wrap up? Okay, not hearing any. I'm going to check the second page. There are 2 pages here, so give me one moment. Okay, I don't see any questions there. All right, so thank you, Evan, and all those from AMP that came and joined us. We appreciate you coming and answering questions. Everybody who came to ask questions and to listen, thank you very much. We appreciate your input and your thoughts. If you have remaining ones, you can email us at selectboard@shutesbury.org. 3 of us will get those emails. So thank you very much. And the planning board, do you want to call yourselves or adjourn yourselves? I'm sorry.
Still muted.
You're muted.
Am I?
Yep,
No,
there you go.
no.
I'm muted or not?
No.
We
Well, we
can-
can hear you.
Oh, good. Well, I think the planning board should close the meeting for the planning board.
Don't we need some discussion first?
Well, there, please talk.
No, I'm kidding.
Okay. Select Board, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Do I hear a second? Is
She's
that a
nodding.
second, April? Okay. All in favor?
Planning board, you need to vote too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
roll call vote.
So I'll call the roll as I see it on adjourning. Michael,
You're on mute.
Have a vote. You didn't have a motion.
Shake your head. Mike.
I moved, but you didn't hear it, so I moved to adjourn.
okay, do I hear a
Second.
second?
A second.
Okay, I'll call, any more discussion? I'll call the roll. Michael,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
have I, Nathan,
Aye.
I'm an aye. Linda,
You did, Linda.
Aye, again.
and
You
I'm an
need
aye.
Jeff.
I'm sorry, I can't see everybody.
And if you were wondering, Deacon, I'm an I too.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Jeff Lacy is muted, but he's, I don't want to speak for him,
It
but
doesn't show on my screen. I mean,
He's not muted anymore. He's just invisible.
What am I voting on?
Adjourning.
adjourning the meeting.
adjourning.
Oh, of course.
That's an aye.
Aye.
That's
Okay.
helpful.
Unanimous for the planning board.
Okay. The Select Board, all those in favor of adjourning?
Errol, I.
Aye.
Makepeace O'Neill, aye. Thank you all for coming.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks,
Night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you,
All right.
Linda, for all
Thank you.
those notes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Evan.
Good night.
Good night.
I have sent around the PowerPoint for everyone.
Thank
Should you want it, and I'll work on any. I don't think I have any questions left, for due outs, but please send me anything that you may want, and we'll Chris or myself or someone will get to it real fast.
Thank you.
Have a good night, guys.
You too.
Good night, Deacon.
Night.
Thank you. Good night, Linda.
Bye, Becky.